Out by Lake Hollow, the wind always moved in whispers, but this morning it screamed. A truck fishtailed across the narrow dirt road, tires screeching like claws across a chalkboard. A fisherman standing knee-deep in the shallows barely had time to turn his head before the blur of silver crashed through the wooden guardrail and vanished into the lake with a sickening splash, the kind that makes your bones forget how to breathe. No one saw who was inside. No one knew if anyone made it out. But 3 minutes later, before the sirens ever pierced the tree line, a black SUV with red and blue strobes came to a sliding halt on the gravel. Officer Rachel Hayes jumped out, hand already on her radio. She wasn't alone. At her side, leaping from the open door like thunder in motion, was her partner, Shadow, a German shepherd with a scar down his left brow and a canine vest that had saved lives across 3 counties. And today he was about to save 2 more. Rachel sprinted down the slope toward the water's edge. A crowd had already formed. Campers, cyclists, kids with half-eaten popsicles, all frozen in place, pointing to the ripples where the car had gone under. Air bubbles still rose, lazy and large. "Do we know how many?" Rachel shouted. A woman near the dock yelled back, I think they were kids in the back seat." Rachel didn't hesitate, but Shadow didn't wait for her command. The dog bolted past her, paws pounding the wet rocks. With a leap that would have made a lion proud, he dove headfirst into the lake. The crowd gasped. Somewhere behind them, a little boy started crying. For a moment, there was only silence. Shadow's paws sliced through the murky water. Visibility dropped fast. Green turned black, the surface fading like a dream behind him. But his nose worked like no diver's gear ever could. He followed the scent trail, oil, metal, fear, until he reached the rear window. Inside, 2 small faces pressed against the glass. A girl, no older than 5, her eyes wide and unblinking, and beside her, a toddler boy with blue lips and limp arms. Water filled the cabin halfway, the angle of the car nose down in the mud. Shadow began to scratch, furious, frantic. His claws found a crack in the window, already fractured. He bit it, yanked, bit again. At the surface, Rachel and 2 other officers were shouting into the water, trying to reach him. And then, a ripple, a burst, and a high-pitched scream. The little girl broke through the water, coughing, gasping, pulled by a pair of strong arms. Rachel's arms, but Shadow didn't surface. 10 seconds, 20, people began to panic. And then the lake broke again, harder this time, and Shadow emerged with the little boy clutched by the collar of his coat. The child wasn't breathing. Rachel dropped to her knees and began CPR. Shadow stood soaked, panting, eyes locked on her hands, refusing to move. 1 minute later, the boy coughed. A miracle. A pair of them. And none of it made sense. If you're moved by stories like this, where courage wears a vest and runs on 4 legs, don't forget to subscribe to Animal Heroes. These brave dogs do more than sniff out danger. They rewrite destinies. And we're here to tell every last story. Back at the lakeshore, paramedics took over. The kids were bundled in emergency blankets, faces pale and silent. Rachel knelt beside the girl, brushing damp hair from her face. "Sweetie, can you tell me your name?" The girl stared at her. Not in fear, in shock. She whispered something Rachel couldn't quite hear. "What was that?" The girl's lip trembled. "He told us not to talk." Rachel's brows furrowed. "Who did?" But the girl shook her head. "He said, if we made noise, he'd make Mommy disappear again." Rachel's blood ran cold. She looked back at the lake. Something wasn't right. The tow crew arrived 2 hours later to winch the car out of the water. It was a silver sedan, front windshield blown inward, rear windows cracked. But the strangest part? No skid marks on the road. No sign of a sudden stop. Just a smooth curve off the edge, like someone had guided the vehicle straight in. Rachel paced the gravel, arms folded. Her eyes scanned every inch of the shoreline, mind racing. "Where are the parents?" one of the medics asked. Rachel didn't answer. She was staring at the passenger seat. The seatbelt was cleanly cut, not frayed, not torn, sliced with something sharp. She crouched near the door. Who buckles in 2 kids and cuts themselves loose? Shadow sat beside her, his fur still damp, but ears alert. He gave a soft growl. Rachel followed his gaze. Half hidden in the reeds, about 20 feet from where the car had landed, something glinted in the mud. She walked over, Shadow at her heel. It was a burned baby shoe, half melted, blackened. She turned it over. On the sole, faded but readable, was a name written in permanent marker. Ellie, age 3. Her gut twisted. That name wasn't the girl's. She called it in. Dispatch, I need a cold case cross-check. Missing child, name Ellie, possibly 3 years old. Search past 5 years. Location radius, 50 miles. Copy that, came the voice. Shadow whimpered softly. Rachel looked at him. You knew, didn't you? The dog didn't move. By sundown, both children were stable in the hospital, but neither had said another word. Rachel sat in her patrol car, watching the last of the daylight vanish behind the pines. Shadow lay beside her, chin on her boot. She looked down at him. What kind of monster puts kids in a car and lets it sink like that? Shadow didn't bark, but his tail thumped once. Not in happiness, in answer. Somewhere, someone thought they got away with it, but Shadow was on the trail now. And this wasn't over. The hospital's overhead lights buzzed softly as Rachel stood at the observation window, watching the 2 children through the glass. Both were asleep now, IVs in their arms, monitors quietly beeping. The girl curled on her side like she was used to sleeping that way, protective, guarded. The boy was a little fighter, even in rest, his small hands still clenched. Rachel had seen a lot in her 12 years on the force, but this was different. 2 kids, no adult in sight, pulled from a lake in a car that showed no signs of an accident, and a baby shoe from a different case altogether. Something wasn't adding up. She rubbed her eyes and turned to the hallway where Shadow waited, tail thumping against the wall like a slow metronome. He never barked at hospitals. Too many smells, too much pain, but he always waited. Come on, partner, she whispered. Let's go back to the lake. The water had gone still, like it had never swallowed a car just hours ago. Rachel crouched on the muddy bank where Shadow had found the burned shoe. She held it in a gloved hand now, examining the writing on the sole again. Ellie, age 3. The ink was faint, but it was there. She took a deep breath and looked across the lake, then back at the tire tracks leading to the guardrail, or the lack thereof. The soil was soft, still damp, and untouched beyond the original tire marks of her own cruiser. No brake marks, no skidding, no panic before the plunge. It was intentional, she muttered. Someone wanted that car in the water. Shadow stood beside her, nose lifted, ears flicking. Then he moved, slowly, cautiously, toward the tree line behind them. Something else? She asked. He didn't respond, just pushed deeper into the brush. Rachel followed, one hand on her belt, the other brushing branches aside. 15 feet in, they found it. A trail of pressed grass, broken twigs, and a boot print. Large, fresh. Rachel crouched. The print was angled away from the lake. Whoever it was, they had been watching. Back at the precinct, Rachel sat in the evidence room surrounded by photos, printouts, and forensic reports. The car's dashboard cam had been destroyed in the impact. No GPS data, no phone inside. The glove box was empty, scrubbed clean, like someone had prepped the vehicle before sending it in. She flipped through case files until she found what she was looking for. Eleanor Ellie Hartley, missing 3 years ago from a neighboring town, last seen near Lake Hollow with her mother. Vehicle never found, no suspects, cold case. And now a burned shoe with her name on it, 30 feet from where the submerged sedan was pulled. Rachel grabbed her phone and called dispatch. Hey, I need access to the archived incident report on Eleanor Hartley. Also, can you pull any missing person cases involving children under 6 in the last 5 years within a 100-mile radius of Lake Hollow? That's a lot of data, Sergeant. I know. Start with any involving water, parks, or known psychiatric records. There was a pause. Got it. You looking at a serial? Rachel didn't answer, not yet, but her gut was telling her something big was under the surface. And Shadow's instincts? They were never wrong. That night, Rachel barely slept. Her dreams were full of water and silence, and the haunting image of that little girl's eyes, too old, too knowing for her age. By morning, Shadow was pacing near the front door of her cabin. She clipped his leash on and headed back to the lake. They didn't go to their crash site this time. Instead, Shadow led her around the lake's western edge, toward an area overgrown with cattails and long-abandoned fire pits. Kids used to camp here, teenagers mostly. But today, the place was still. Shadow stopped at a rotted wooden bench and began to bark, low, deep, insistent. Rachel stepped down around and saw it, a second set of tire tracks, almost invisible under a layer of leaves and ash. They curved in from the opposite road, then abruptly ended. No impact marks, no debris. Then she noticed the shallow indentation in the dirt, rectangle-shaped, maybe 2 feet long. She brushed away the top layer and found something hard. Metal. A buried license plate. She exhaled sharply. Call it in, she whispered, already dialing. The team arrived within the hour and excavation began. It didn't take long. Beneath 2 feet of dirt was the chassis of a burned-out car, melted nearly beyond recognition. But they pulled enough from the VIN to confirm it. It was the Hartley vehicle. Rachel stood frozen. That case had been cold for 3 years, and now it had resurfaced, quite literally. Only there was no body inside. The child was never found. Until now, at the hospital, the girl had finally spoken. She said his name was Danny, the nurse told Rachel. Her little brother. She keeps asking if he can come into her room. That's a good sign, Rachel said, masking her concern. She also keeps asking where her real mommy is. Rachel's stomach twisted. Wait, what do you mean? Her real mom? The nurse frowned. She says, the other one told us not to scream, that she was the quiet mommy, but not the real one. Rachel's thoughts snapped into overdrive. 2 women? She entered the room gently. The little girl, now identified as Lily, looked up. Her eyes weren't as scared today. Hey there, Lily, Rachel said. I brought someone. Shadow trotted in, tail wagging low. Lily's face lit up. He saved us, she said softly. He found us. Rachel smiled. That's right, and he's going to help us find out who hurt you. Lily's eyes dimmed again. He was wearing gloves. He drove fast, and he said not to cry or he'd make mommy go away again. Rachel leaned in. Did he hurt your mommy? Lily nodded once. She screamed. Then he got mad. A lump formed in Rachel's throat. Where did he take her? Lily looked down. To the red house, with no windows. Rachel drove straight to the county land use office. It took less than 20 minutes to narrow down what she needed. An abandoned cabin, once part of a defunct hunting lodge, sat less than a mile from the lake. Locals called it the Red Shack, named for its rust-colored siding and crumbling roof. She and Shadow headed there next. The forest grew quiet the closer they got. Shadow's ears perked before Rachel could even see the building. He took off, sprinting toward the shack, and started to howl. Rachel rushed in behind him, flashlight drawn. The door was off its hinges. Inside, broken furniture, moldy mattresses, and the stench of something long dead. But Shadow wasn't barking at the room. He was pawing at the floorboards. Rachel got on her knees and pried the boards loose. Beneath them was a hollow compartment, and inside it, a woman's purse, blood-stained and full of expired IDs, including one with the name Dana Hartley. Rachel's breath caught Ellie's mother. She called it in. Within an hour, the scene was secured, but Rachel remained still, sitting on the porch beside Shadow. He killed. He killed her, she whispered, and he's still out there. Shadow rested his head on her lap. But even in the quiet of the trees, Rachel couldn't shake the feeling someone had been watching them the whole time. And the trail wasn't cold yet. Rachel had stared at 100 crime scenes in her career. She'd walked into domestic disputes, drug busts, even homicide cleanups. But this one sat differently in her bones. The shack was a shell. Rotten floorboards, burned insulation, and the smell of mildew clung to everything. But what got her most wasn't the bloodstained purse or the forgotten mattress. It was the toys, a faded plush bunny, a deflated beach ball, a doll with one eye missing. Children had been here, and not just once. Shadow paced the edges of the room, ears swiveling, nose low to the floor. Every time he passed a certain corner by the broken window, his tail stiffened. A low growl buzzed in his throat, almost like a warning. Rachel kneeled and peeled back a tarp half buried under dust and leaves. Underneath, she found ropes. Frayed, cut clean, one still stained dark red. She clenched her jaw. Someone had used this place to keep people, probably more than once. She took out her phone and started snapping photos. The prints on the floor were old but not ancient. Muddy boot impressions, 2 sizes, adult, male, heavy. That lined up with Lily's story, one man with gloves, driving fast, and the quiet mommy who wasn't her real one. Rachel closed her eyes. They were being passed around. Back at the station, she pinned the printed photo of the purse on the board, right beneath the names Dana and Eleanor Hartley. The VIN from the burned car confirmed that Dana had gone missing with Ellie, but only the shoe was found. Where's Ellie now? She murmured. The timelines were tangled. Ellie had vanished 3 years ago. Lily and Danny had been pulled from the lake yesterday. 2 different families, 2 different vehicles, but the same lake. And maybe the same man. She turned to the corkboard where she'd started connecting red strings. Cases of missing children under age 6, all within a 90-mile radius of Lake Hollow, 4 total in the past 5 years. Each one had gone cold, all with no trace of the child, no vehicle found, no suspects. Until now, Rachel returned to the hospital that evening. Shadow stayed by the entrance while she walked in. Lily was sitting up, cradling a juice box in both hands. Her eyes lit up when she saw Rachel. "You came back," she said. Rachel smiled gently. "I told you I would. Is your brother awake?" "He's still sleepy," but the lady with the curly hair read him a book. "That's good." Lily paused, then said, "I remembered something." Rachel pulled up a chair. "Tell me." When the man drove the car, he said we were going to the waterhouse. "The lake?" Lily nodded. "He said it hides secrets. That's where the others sleep." Rachel kept her expression steady, even as her stomach dropped. "The others?" she asked softly. Lily hesitated, fidgeting with her juice straw. "There was a girl. She had curly hair like me. She said her name was Ellie." Rachel leaned forward. "How long was she with you?" "She left before the water. The quiet mommy took her somewhere." Rachel's mind raced. If Ellie had been alive recently, then someone was still moving them around. The next day, Rachel met with Deputy Marks out at the scene where the Hartley car had been pulled from the lake. He was older, slow to trust gut instincts, but smart enough to know when to follow them. "You think this was a pattern?" he asked, staring out at the water. Rachel nodded. "I think the kids were kept in that shack. I think the guy staged the crash on purpose. The car was scrubbed, no prints, no hair. It was cleaned. Why not just leave the kids somewhere? Why fake a crash?" She glanced back at the shoreline. Maybe he got scared. Maybe Lily was starting to remember too much. Or maybe someone else was watching, trying to shut it all down. Mark scratched his chin. "If this goes beyond one guy," Rachel finished the thought, "we're looking at a ring." He didn't respond, but the weight of his silence said enough. Rachel spent the afternoon combing through old real estate records, zoning maps, and abandoned property files. She found 3 other shacks like the one they'd found, the same make and layout, spread across different parts of the county. All registered under a shell company dissolved 6 years ago. 2 of the sites were burned down. The third, still standing according to satellite images. She grabbed her keys. "Come on, Shadow." The third cabin sat on a hilltop, half swallowed by pines. Unlike the other 2, it wasn't rotting. It had been maintained. A new lock on the gate, no signs of animals breaking in. The grass looked trimmed. Rachel's hand went to her sidearm. Shadow stood alert, ears high. She nudged the door open with her foot and stepped inside. No furniture, no dust. But the walls were covered in photographs. Dozens of them, maybe more. Snapshots of children. Some playing, some sleeping, some in cars. All time-stamped, all marked with dates. And every single one had a small red X in the bottom corner. Rachel's throat tightened. On a small table near the far wall, a laptop sat open. A list of names ran down the screen, partially coded with cross-referenced initials. She scrolled. 2 names jumped out. LH, Lily Hayes. Delivered. DH, Danny Hayes. Delivered. Underneath those, EH, Eleanor Hartley. Transferred. DH, Donna Hartley. Terminated. Rachel stepped back like she'd been slapped. This wasn't just a predator. This was a network. She slammed the laptop shut and called it in. Forensics would come. The feds would come. But her mind was already somewhere else. Transferred, the list had said. That meant Ellie was still out there. That night, Rachel couldn't sit still. She took Shadow back to the lake. The moon was high and pale, its light scattering across the surface like broken glass. The wind rustled through the reeds, whispering things too low to hear. Shadow led her to the same dock where the fisherman had seen the car sink. He sniffed once, then turned away. Toward the trail behind the trees, Rachel followed, flashlight off. The air smelled like pine, earth, and something else, old wood smoke. They reached a hollowed-out log. Shadow stopped, nose to the bark. Rachel looked inside. A blanket, still warm, and next to it a juice box. The same brand the hospital had given Lily. Someone had been watching. Someone had come back. And now, someone else knew that Rachel and Shadow were getting close. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. The next morning, Rachel stood at the base of the hill behind the lake, boots sunk half an inch into fresh mud. Shadow moved ahead, nose low, tail alert. Overnight rains had turned the forest floor into a sponge, washing away most of the tracks, but not all. Near the old bong where they'd found the warm blanket and juice box the night before, something had shifted. The blanket was gone, so was the straw from the juice box. Only a single footprint remained, partially filled with water, but large, deep, and facing the woods. Someone had come back, and they'd left in a hurry. Rachel crouched near the edge of the print and swept a gloved hand across the soil. Boot tread, she muttered. Same pattern as the ones from the shack. Shadow gave a low, steady growl, his nose pointed west, deeper into the trees. You smell him, don't you? He didn't wag his tail, just waited. She rose slowly, sweeping the area with her eyes. Then she radioed in. Unit 14 to base. I need backup and drone support in Grid 3C. Possible suspect returned to scene. Evidence removed. Proceeding on foot with K9. The dispatcher's voice crackled. Copy that, Unit 14. Backup ETA 25 minutes. Use caution. Rachel clicked off. 25 minutes was a long time. They moved quietly deeper into the woods. The air was thick with the scent of moss, pine, and something else. Sharp, metallic. Shadow veered left. His gait slowed. Then he stopped cold, nose pointing at a large pile of brush. Rachel approached cautiously, hand on her weapon. She pushed back the branches. A blue tarp, wadded up like trash, streaked in something dark. She peeled it back. Children's clothing, soaked. Some of it cut, some burned. The size tags matched toddlers in early elementary. A small red shirt still had a name tag safety pinned inside. Danny H. Her breath caught. It was the same shirt Danny had been wearing in the hospital. But this one had a hole burned through the shoulder. Rachel backed up, her throat dry. This wasn't just disposal. This was a message. By the time the search team arrived, Rachel had cordoned off the area and marked the tarp with orange flags. Shadow sat beside her, eyes fixed on the trail beyond the trees. Deputy Marks stepped over the tape. Jesus, that his shirt? Rachel nodded. But it wasn't on him when we found him. Means someone changed them out after. Probably right before ditching the car. Marks rubbed his jaw. You think this is about covering tracks? I think it's about control, Rachel said. Whoever did this wanted to erase their connection to those kids. And now they know we're closing in. He looked toward the woods. So what now? She pointed down the trail. Shadow's got a scent. We're not waiting anymore. They followed Shadow west, toward a ridgeline that overlooked the town's defunct ranger station, abandoned since funding cuts 5 years ago. The building sat squat and gray against the tree line, boarded windows and a sagging porch giving it a haunted look. Shadow barked once and took off toward the back entrance. Rachel followed, gun drawn. The door wasn't locked. Inside, the air smelled stale, wood rot and mold mixed with the faint tang of sweat. Furniture was overturned. Empty cans littered the floor. And on the wall were pictures, dozens of them, again. But these weren't just surveillance shots. They were posed. Children in chairs, children holding signs with numbers, some smiling, most not. Rachel's stomach turned. This wasn't a hunting cabin. It was a processing site. In the back room, a twin mattress lay on the floor beside a portable space heater. Crayons were scattered across the rug. A child's drawing was taped to the wall, stick figures holding hands beneath a crooked sun. In the corner, Shadow began to bark. Rachel turned. He was standing beside a file cabinet, one drawer ajar. She opened it fully. Inside, folders, labeled with initials. Inside each, Polaroids, height, weight records, and handwritten notes. Some had red stamps, adopted, transferred, failed. One folder was marked LH and DH, Lily and Danny. Rachel flipped through the pages. A photo of the two kids in a van, a handwritten note. Too old to break, keep sedated. Another folder read EH. Rachel opened it. No photo, just a line. Moved to TS Site 9B, pending final. She snapped the drawer shut. Site 9B. That meant there was another location, one they hadn't touched yet. Rachel brought the documents back to the station, where a forensic analyst began scanning and logging the contents. The department's captain approved an urgent multi-agency task force. FBI would be involved by morning. But Rachel couldn't wait. She called a contact at Child Services, someone she trusted, Megan Torres. Meg, I need every facility with the initials TS within a 200-mile radius. Public, private, clinics, doesn't matter. Cross-reference with any flag for safety violations or abuse reports in the last 5 years. Megan was quiet on the other end. Please, Rachel added, this one's not just red tape, it's real, and they're still moving kids. I'll get you a list in an hour, Megan replied. Rachel exhaled. Thank you. That night, she returned to the hospital. The nurse greeted her quietly. They've been asking for you. Rachel stepped into Lily's room. Danny was asleep, fingers tangled in his sister's sweatshirt. Lily was awake. Her eyes flicked toward Shadow immediately. He's back, she whispered. Rachel smiled. He missed you. Lily leaned forward. I saw her. Rachel tilted her head. Who? The girl with the curly hair. She was at the place with numbers. Rachel sat down slowly. What place? It had white walls and lights that buzzed. They gave us yucky milk and told us to smile when people came. Rachel's heart dropped. Was it a house? Lily shook her head. It was like a hospital, but not nice. They called me by a number. Rachel pulled out her notebook. Do you remember what number? Lily thought. Then he 43. Rachel stared at the page. Lily looked up. They said Ellie was 42. At 11:36 p.m., and Miss Megan called back. I found something, she said. There's a private transitional shelter registered as Tranquil Springs Youth Facility, TS on all their internal files. Location, southwest corner of Glendale County. But here's the thing, on paper, they shut down 4 years ago. But there are still deliveries being made, food, medical supplies, generators. Rachel stood up, heart pounding. Get me everything you have on it. She hung up and looked at Shadow. One more trail, buddy. He was already by the door. The rain started again before dawn, thin and steady, washing the world in gray. Rachel hadn't slept. The glow from her dashboard clock blurred every time she blinked. Shadow sat upright in the passenger seat, his head turning with every passing tree, ears flicking at distant sounds only he could hear. They were 10 miles from Glendale County, heading toward what the records called Tranquil Springs Youth Facility, a name that sounded more like a retreat than what Lily had described. But Rachel had learned long ago that monsters often hid behind gentle names. The road narrowed to cracked asphalt, bordered by wire fencing swallowed in vines. No signposts, no lights, just the woods. And then, at the end of the road, a faded blue sign half covered by ivy. Tranquil Springs, private property, no entry. Rachel parked behind a cluster of pines, cut the engine, and let the silence settle. She looked at Shadow. Ready? He tilted his head, the scar above his eye catching the faint morning light. That was all the answer she needed. The facility looked dead, windows boarded, doors chained, the once white paint flaking in long curls. But it didn't feel abandoned. The gravel near the gate was freshly disturbed, tire tracks still slick from last night's rain. Rachel crouched and ran her fingers through the mud. The tread wasn't from a standard car. Too narrow, too even. Van, she whispered. She moved around the back, Shadow keeping low. Near the loading dock, she found what she was afraid of, an unlocked maintenance door, hinges still shiny under the rust. Someone had been here recently, maybe still was. She pushed it open. The smell hit first, disinfectant and rot, the kind that doesn't come from neglect. It comes from people trying to hide something. They entered a long hallway, walls lined with peeling posters of smiling children and motivational quotes. The floor tiles were cracked and streaked with dried mud, every few feet a numbered door. Shadow sniffed at the air, then turned sharply left toward a stairwell descending into darkness. Rachel followed, flashlight in hand, her boots echoed faintly on the concrete. At the bottom, the beam of her light caught a heavy metal door marked restricted access, staff only. The handle was clean, too clean. She pushed. It creaked open. Inside was a basement-sized lab, or what used to be one. Tables overturned, filing cabinets gutted, paper scattered across the floor. But the far corner drew her eye, a wall of clipboards, each labeled with initials. LH, 43DA, 44EA, 42. Her breath froze. Lily, Danny, Ellie. She pulled one clipboard free and scanned it. The top line read, Behavioral Response Testing, Phase 2, Isolation and Resilience. Below it, dosage schedules, emotional response notes, and what looked like coded data about conditioning. Her stomach turned. This wasn't a trafficking case. It was something darker, something systemic. Shadow whined low, staring at a door at the back of the room. Rachel approached it slowly. Behind the door, she heard it. A faint sound, not machinery, not wind. A hum, like someone breathing. She drew her weapon and kicked it open. The smell of mold mixed with something acrid, like burnt plastic. Rows of metal cages lined the walls, some empty, others holding old blankets and rusted feeding trays. The air was stale, suffocating. And then Shadow barked, once sharp. In the corner, a small figure stirred. Rachel ran forward, heart hammering. It was a girl, maybe 9 or 10, her hair tangled, her face pale. She flinched at the light. It's okay, Rachel said, kneeling. You're safe. I'm with the police. The girl shook her head violently. No police. He said they lie. Rachel softened her voice. Who said that? She pointed to the far wall. Boys. A smear drawing done in crayon. 3 stick figures, Two small, one tall. The tall one had black gloves drawn on his hands. Rachel swallowed hard. "What's your name?" The girl whispered, "Ellie." Rachel wrapped her in a blanket from her pack, guiding her carefully up the stairs. The girl's legs were weak. Every sound made her flinch. But she clung to Rachel's arm like it was the only solid thing left in the world. Outside, the light was breaking through the clouds when a van engine echoed faintly in the distance. Rachel froze. Headlights glimmered through the trees. "Stay low," she hissed. She crouched behind the stone steps with Ellie tucked under her arm. Shadow pressed against her leg, growling. The van slowed, black, no plates. It rolled past the front gates, tires crunching over the gravel, before stopping near the loading dock. The driver door opened and a man stepped out, tall, broad, moving with the calm of someone who wasn't afraid to be caught. He wore black gloves. Rachel exhaled, whispering to herself, "You've got to be kidding me." She recognized him. Detective Carl Hensley, Internal Affairs, her own department. For a few seconds, the world stopped. Rachel's mind spun backward. Every delay in paperwork, every missing report, every strange accident that kept pushing the case off priority lists. He'd been inside it all along. Hensley lit a cigarette, took one drag, then walked toward the entrance. He didn't see her. Didn't see the K9 crouched in the shadows. Rachel waited until he disappeared inside, then whispered to Shadow, "Stay with her." She rose silently, gun in hand, and slipped around the side of the building. Inside, she could hear him whistling. The sound echoed down the hall like nails on glass. She followed him into the corridor, every sense wired tight. The hum of fluorescent lights above flickered weakly. When she reached the basement landing, Hensley was standing by the open door, staring at the cages. He muttered to himself, "Should have burned it all." Rachel stepped from the shadows. "Step away from the wall, Carl." He turned slowly, smoke curling from his cigarette. "Rachel Hayes, I'll be damned." "You already are," she said, steadying her weapon. "Hands where I can see them." He smiled. "You really think you understand what's going on here? You think this is about kids and bad men in gloves? I think you've been hiding bodies." He shook his head. "No, Rachel, I've been cleaning them up." He flicked the cigarette into the puddle by his feet. "You dig too deep, and you find out how much your own department depends on the mess. Funding, federal grants, private programs. You think those files in there mean something? They're just the leftovers. You put them in that lake." He didn't deny it. "What did you do to their mothers?" Still smiling, he whispered, "Same thing they did to mine." And then he lunged. The gun went off. Once, twice. Shadows barking filled the air above them like thunder. When the noise died, Rachel was on the floor, her shoulder burning, the world spinning. Hensley lay sprawled against the far wall, blood pooling under his arm. For a long moment, the only sound was Shadow's growl fading into a whine as he sniffed her arm. Rachel pressed her hand to the wound and pushed herself upright. "I'm fine, boy, I'm fine." She stumbled to Hensley's body, kicked the gun away, and knelt. His eyes were still open, lips twitching like he wanted to say something. She leaned in. He whispered, "There's another one." Then he went still. By the time backup arrived, the sun was breaking over the hills. Ellie had been taken to safety. Rachel's shoulder was patched and bandaged. The facility was sealed off as a crime scene. Captain Ruiz met her at the gate. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded. "I've been better." He looked toward the building. "They found a tunnel. Leads down another half-mile. God knows what else is under there." Rachel sighed. "He said there's another one. Another site." Ruiz frowned. "You sure he wasn't bluffing?" She shook her head. "No, not this time." Shadow stood beside her, fur still damp from the rain, eyes fixed on the horizon. Rachel placed a hand on his neck. "If there's another one," she said quietly, "we'll find it." That night, Rachel drove home in silence. The weight of what she'd seen pressed against her chest. The kids, the files, the faces on the walls, every part of it would haunt her. But when she looked over at Shadow, sitting tall, steady, unshaken, she found a piece of calm she hadn't felt in weeks. They weren't finished, not by a long shot. The first real snow of the season fell that night. Not the kind that gently dusts rooftops and slows traffic. This came in heavy sheets, thick enough to blanket roads, clog radios, and stall helicopters. Glendale County became a maze of muffled wind and white silence. But Rachel didn't stop moving. While the rest of the task force prepped warrants and filed reports, she sat alone in the dim glow of her station's map room, poring over every inch of the region's topography. Satellite scans, elevation overlays, power line routes. Hensley's final words looped in her mind. There's another one. By 3 a.m. she found it. An old FEMA property once used for disaster training, decommissioned 7 years ago. On paper, it had been stripped for salvage. In reality, its underground access tunnel still connected to the main grid, active utilities, quiet power draw, and no scheduled visitors for the past 4 years. Rachel stared at the satellite image. Snow-covered pine forest, a single utility shed near the center. No road, no parking lot, just a narrow trail through the woods and silence. Exactly the kind of place someone wouldn't stumble across. She closed the laptop. Come on, Shadow. The forest was nearly impassable by dawn. Thick powder clung to branches like wet plaster, and the air smelled sharp, like ice and rust. Rachel parked her 4x4 a half-mile out and trekked in on foot, Shadow bounding ahead, his fur rimmed with frost. The silence felt unnatural. No birds, no distant engines, just the crunch of snow and the breath between steps. When the shed came into view, Rachel slowed. It looked harmless, old, tilted, the kind of place kids dared each other to explore in the summer. But Shadow didn't treat it like a shed. He stopped cold, ears forward, one paw raised. Then he growled, low, deliberate. Rachel knelt beside him and reached for her radio. Unit 14 to command. I've located possible Site B, southeast quadrant of Glendale Forest. Coordinates pinged. Approaching on foot. No sign of movement. Yet. Static, then. Copy that, Unit 14. Reinforcements en route. ETA 45 minutes. Proceed with extreme caution. She clicked the radio off. Too long. She wasn't waiting. The lock on the door wasn't old. It was new, digital, and clearly out of place. But someone had left it ajar. Whether by mistake or trap, she couldn't tell. She pulled it open slowly. The air inside rushed out like a secret held too long. Cold, chemical, stale. Inside, a concrete staircase led straight down. The walls were smooth, insulated. Lights flickered on motion sensors, humming faintly to life with each step. Shadow followed without hesitation. At the bottom, a wide hallway, sterile and echoing. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. To the left, storage rooms, all empty. To the right, a control room. Rachel stepped inside. Rows of monitors still blinked. The servers were humming, low and steady. On the wall, live feeds showed empty rooms, observation cells. 2 still had occupants. A boy, maybe 6, curled on a cot, staring blankly at a wall. A teenage girl, pacing, her knuckles bloodied from punching the door. Rachel's pulse quickened. She turned to the control panel. One button read, Remote Unlock. She hit it. Instantly, the lights in the observation room switched from red to green. Doors clicked open. On the screen, the boy flinched. The girl paused mid-step, blinking as if unsure she was free. Rachel grabbed the hallway map taped beside the console and bolted towards cell block B, Shadow at her heels. The sound of metal doors creaking open echoed like thunder down the corridor. She reached the boy first. Hey, she said softly, crouching low. It's okay, my name's Rachel. You're safe now. He didn't speak, just stared. She held out her hand. Come on, kiddo. We're getting out of here. He reached for her, fingers trembling. Footsteps behind her. Rachel turned. The girl, older, wiry frame, eyes full of fire, stood in the doorway watching them. I don't know your name, Rachel said gently, but you're free to leave. Can you help him walk? The girl nodded. As they turned toward the exit, the hallway lights flickered. Once, then again. Then a siren began to rise, low and sharp. Shadow barked. Rachel spun around just as a side door slammed open, and a figure stepped out. Not Hensley. Worse. The man was taller, built like a tree stump, with eyes like dead glass and hands wrapped in rubber gloves. The name tag on his collar read Dr. R. Voss, a name Rachel recognized from files Megan had flagged weeks ago. He didn't flinch at the sight of her gun. Instead, he smiled, you shouldn't be here. Rachel held steady. Neither should they. They were never yours to take. She didn't wait. She fired. Once, twice. The first shot clipped his shoulder. The second missed as he dove sideways, crashing into a supply cabinet and disappearing behind it. Shadow lunged forward, teeth bared. Go, Rachel yelled at the kids. Back to the stairs. Now! The girl grabbed the boy and ran. Rachel followed, Shadow staying close but glancing over his shoulder. They hit the stairwell just as the emergency lights turned red. Behind them, Dr. Voss roared, You think this ends with me? You think any of this stops? Rachel didn't answer. She shoved the kids up the stairs and burst out into the cold morning light. Snow swirled like smoke. And in the distance, sirens. Backup arrived in minutes. Agents swept the site, but by the time they reached the control room, Voss was gone. Blood trails led to a maintenance tunnel, empty by the time anyone followed. Empty by the time the site was confirmed. Active child trafficking in illegal psychological testing facility. Funded through Shell grants and fake medical research organizations. The boy's name was Jish. The girl, Marina. Both had been missing for months. Their faces had been plastered across missing persons reports, now buried under bureaucratic neglect. Rachel stood outside the shed, watching the stretchers roll by. Paramedics wrapped the kids in thermal blankets. Marina looked at Rachel once, just briefly, and nodded. It wasn't thanks. It was survival. A recognition of what had been taken and what had been saved. That night, Rachel sat in her truck, staring at the darkness beyond her windshield. The snow had stopped. A full moon hung low over the trees. Shadow sat beside her, silent, steady. She looked at him. You found them, she whispered. His ears twitched. She reached out and rested a hand on his chest. You always do. Her phone buzzed. It was Megan. We pulled Voss's financials. There's one more grant, one more location. Remote site in Nevada, desert facility. Dates match with a missing transport van from last month. Rachel closed her eyes for a second, then opened them. Send me everything, she said. She looked at Shadow. He was already up, nose toward the glass, ready for the next trail. 3 weeks later, the Nevada desert gave nothing away. No trees, no shadows, just a rolling sea of rust-colored hills, wind-scarred rocks, and a silence that felt ancient. Rachel stood beside her unmarked vehicle, the sun at her back, eyes on a structure barely visible beneath layers of red dust. It looked like nothing, an abandoned mining station, roof half collapsed, boarded windows, old no trespassing signs flapping in the breeze. To any passerby, it was a forgotten relic of the old frontier. But Shadow knew better. He stood still as a statue, his nose pointed directly at the decaying door, body locked in that low, humming tension he only ever showed when danger was close. Rachel adjusted her vest. Let's finish this. The inside smelled like rot, rust, and lies. Rachel moved through the first floor quickly. Old equipment, broken monitors, collapsed beams. But it was the back wall that caught her attention. A steel elevator shaft sealed with a keypad. She turned to Shadow. He was already digging at the corner. Beneath the dust, her gloved hand found it, a narrow keycard slot. She pulled the one they'd found at Tranquil Springs out of her pocket and slid it in. A green light blinked. The elevator rumbled to life. They descended into silence. The air below was frigid. Concrete walls, harsh fluorescent lights, and a sound Rachel had learned to dread. The slow, steady hum of generators. This facility was bigger, cleaner, more expensive, and more hidden. Shadow led the way, nose twitching. They passed through narrow hallways lined with doors, numbered again, but this time with no windows. Deadbolts, reinforced locks. No screams, no voices, just one sound, barely there. A rhythmic thud like someone kicking gently against a door. Rachel raised her weapon. They followed Door 7B had no name, just a dent in the center, right where a small fist had struck it over and over again. She knocked gently. Hello? Silence. Then a whisper. You're not the man. Rachel's throat tightened. No, sweetie, I'm not. Do you have a dog? Rachel looked at Shadow. He's right here. A pause, then a thud of running feet. A latch clicked. The door creaked open. Inside stood a girl, small, pale, maybe 7. Her hair was matted, but her eyes were alive. You're real, she said. Rachel knelt. What's your name? She swallowed. Ellie. Rachel blinked. Ellie, Hartley? The girl nodded. 3 years. Everyone thought she was dead. But there she was, standing in front of them. Alive! They didn't leave immediately. Rachel knew the place was bigger, deeper. Ellie stayed close, clutching Shadow's collar like it was her anchor. Room after room revealed more signs of what had happened here. Filing cabinets, digital logs, medical equipment far too advanced for any legal operation. Names, numbers, schedules. And then in the final corridor, Rachel found a storage room. Inside, boxes labeled archives. One box was marked Psychological Failures Disposal. She opened it. Photos, dozens, children, men, women. Victims, test subjects. Some faces had red lines drawn through them. Some had notes, resisted transfer, non-compliant, eliminated. Rachel put the lid back on. She didn't cry, not yet. There would be time for that later. By the time the FBI teams arrived, Ellie was safely in the back of the vehicle, wrapped in Shadow's emergency blanket. He lay beside her, his head resting near her legs, calm and quiet. Rachel stood near the edge of the entrance, hands on her hips, watching agents swarm the site. Captain Ruiz stepped up beside her. "You were right," he said. "I wish I wasn't. 37 kids, that we know of, some still alive, some—" He didn't finish. Rachel nodded. "You did good, Hayes." She looked at Shadow. "We did." Ellie's reunion with her grandparents was quiet and tearful. Her mother had been confirmed as deceased, one of the early victims buried in a shallow grave near the original lake site. Her father, never found. Rachel didn't press. Some wounds stayed closed for a reason. Ellie barely let go of Shadow during the whole exchange. The girl had formed a bond with him so deep, the therapist later called it trauma tethering. Shadow didn't seem to mind. He stayed at her side like a guardian. She was one of the lucky ones. Some others never remembered their names. Some didn't speak at all. But they were safe now. A week later, Rachel sat on the back steps of her small farmhouse outside town. Shadow lay beside her, his head on her boot. The stars were out, clear and sharp, no clouds. She held a mug of coffee in her hands, steam curling up in the night air. A radio crackled softly inside with chatter from the new task force being assembled. She wasn't sure if she'd stay on it. This case had changed her. There were scars now, deep ones. But there was peace, too. Peace in knowing that someone got out. That all the nights crawling through files, chasing ghosts, listening to children whisper broken truths, had led to light, had led to life. She reached down and scratched behind Shadow's ear. "You did good, partner." His tail thumped once. They never found Dr. Voss. His name was added to an international watch list. Interpol, Homeland, FBI, all eyes out. But Rachel knew the truth. People like him didn't vanish. They went underground and waited. Which is why she never hung up her badge, not fully. Because as long as there were shadows, someone needed to shine a light into them. And sometimes that someone walked on four legs. Thank you for following this story. We know it was heavy, these topics are hard, but so very real. And somewhere out there, there are kids still waiting to be found, still waiting to be heard. What would you do if a child whispered a truth no one else believed? Let us know in the comments. And until next time, stay brave, stay kind, and never stop listening.